Jeffrey and Robert.
I fell in with this crazy artist named Charlie Clough, who lived, he was the first real artist I ever met. He lived in what was an old, this is ironic about Buffalo, he lived in an old abandoned ice factory. Why do you have ice factories in Buffalo? I don't know, but he had this incredible studio that was, I got a studio across the hall from him. The city kind of owned the building, and I got a studio across the hall from him, and he had all these art magazines and stuff like that, and he was basically my teacher for the first couple of years. I was going to the regular art school, I mean the university that was there, which was terrible, and I was rebelling against them, and the professors there were giving me a hard time saying you'll never graduate. But we ended up starting using the money that they had at the school for some art club to invite artists to come talk at the school, and then we'd get them to come over to Hall Walls, which was literally the hallway between my studio and Charlie's, where we started doing exhibitions. And then someone said, you should apply for a grant. So we applied to the New York State Council and the NEA, and we got money, which was bizarre. And then we started living up literally above it, in a loft above it. And what we would do is we'd go to New York, go knock on artists' doors, and said, we want to come to Buffalo? We'll give you like $200. You can maybe do an exhibition or do a talk. And we were amazed that they would come, and like Saul Witt couldn't come, so he gave us a wall drawing to do. Richard Serra came, stayed for a couple of days. John Borowski came and got snowed in for like almost a week and a half. So the weather really helped us because some of the artists got stuck there for a while. And Bruce Nauman came, Joan Jonas came, Linda Bangles came. It was like, and we were so hungry for knowledge. It was like we were pulling them out of New York City and basically doing a Vulcan mind meld. You know, we had them, and we could just like suck their brains, you know. And it was one of the most important things of my development as artist. And the irony about this is that when I was living with Cindy Sherman at the time, and at one point I got into this exhibition, this pictures exhibition, and Cindy also had gotten an NEA grant, and so I had the exhibition in the city. Cindy had the money, so we decided to move to New York City. And the last show that so I was one of the curators. Charlie and I ran this kind of like band of crazies in Buffalo, and when we got to New York City, we kind of the last show that I curated there was based off of a show of artists that I met through. I was really fortunate to meet Helene Weiner at Artist Space at the time, and Artist Space was this alternative space in New York City, and she turned us on to a bunch of artists that she knew that she thought we would be interested. So the last show that I curated had Jack Goldstein, Troy Brontuk, Matt Mulligan, and artists that to this day I'm still friends with. And when we moved to New York, somehow these group from Hall Walls, like Cindy and I and Troy and Jack and that group of people, there was a similarity, and this became what Pictures Generation became.
Right, so it's a fascinating merger between Buffalo and Los Angeles, Pomona.
I know, it's really
and
weird.
So it's a lot of these artists graduate from CalArts in the 70s, and some had shown with Helene in Pomona.
Yeah.
And so it's a fascinating merger of the two most unlikely places in America, Buffalo and Los Angeles. And that really formed the Pictures Generation.
And the picture show was an interesting show because, you know, I mean, the simple gag
So we should just make, so one of the foundational exhibitions of New York City and really the whole art world of the 1970s was the Pictures Generation show.
Yeah. I mean, I think the simplest way to explain what we were doing at the time, I think, is it sounds a bit trite, but what we were doing basically we were making pictures of pictures. And there was this amazing art historian critic, Doug Crimp, who wrote the text for the catalog, which was really informative as a younger artist. To have somebody actually write about your work was really great. And Helene, who was running Artist Space, was incredibly supportive of all of us. And she was like, kind of like in a weird way, not quite the ringleader, but she kind of got us to all meet each other and know what was going on. So that became really important. And the beautiful part of the story is that Elaine later went on with Janelle Rearing to open up Metro Pictures, which would become the gallery that I showed with for like 40 years. So in that sense, the Hallwalls, Buffalo was a really weird place to be. I hated the snow and stuff like that for sure, but it was close to Niagara Falls. But anyway.
So let's go backwards a little bit to Long Island and your formation.
Yeah.
And a lot of your work is black and white, not all of it, but tell us about growing up watching black and white TV
Yeah.
and how you experience the wider world through the TV, images behind glass, and how that was so essential in the development of your artistic vision.
So I realized that I was dyslexic because I had a really hard time reading, and I basically faked my way through school. I was always drawing, that for sure, that was one of the things. But I watched TV endlessly. We had a basement in our house. We live in the suburbs of Long Island, where house was built by Levitt, who built Levittown, the track houses, and we had a finished basement and a TV there, and I watched TV around the clock. And it's ironic, when I met Cindy, one of our common things that we had in common is we both watched, in New York, they had this thing called $1 Million Movie, and it was on a local station, and they would show movies 3 times a day. So for instance, King Kong would be on 3 times a day, and it would be on the whole week. So I could get to watch King Kong 40 times. And we both watched the same movies. It was really kind of interesting. And so watching TV was a really integral part of it. And I remember many years later, I was getting very upset that I was dealing with the plexiglass on my drawings, that I always have to, I've accepted the idea of the reflections. I like that things reflected into each other. If you notice in the show upstairs, like, the Capitol reflects into the White House. The White House, it reflects into this, the Supreme Court. But I remember talking to Kiefer about this idea about, your work looks like, did you grow up around all this bombed out stuff? He says, yeah, that's why my work looks like that. And I realized the plexiglass, my work is like, everything I saw was behind glass, was a screen. And then it became even more current how now we live in a time where everything is behind a screen for us. So I've kind of grown to accept the plexiglass. Although the last show I did, I showed the work without the plexiglass. Although the work is incredibly fragile, it's made out of charcoal. So if somebody went up to it, it would be totally destroyed. But in that sense, I mean, the glass made sense to me in that sense, that it was part of my origin story.
So let's talk about your medium, drawing. So what you've done is really beyond drawing. You have reinvented the medium. And I love this line you stated, that you make your work out of dust, out of charcoal. So I'd like to ask you about your technique and how it developed. And it was always very impressive, but it's now astonishingly impressive. And then also you invented this conception of the artist that you could be almost like a film director, that you didn't have to make every single stroke yourself, even though you are fully capable of doing that. Mm. So I remember your first big show at Metro Pictures, and people were astonished by the work, but equally astonished by this vinyl wall sign that was like a movie, like that Robert Longo, just like the director, and then listing all the people who were involved in making the work. So it's a very unique approach to art that you invented, and it's had so much influence.
I can't take the credit for inventing it. I had one of the most influential people on me as far as art making goes was Jack Goldstein and Troy Brontuck. And I remember meeting Jack Goldstein. He came to Buffalo to show his films, and we had some of his photographs there. But we wanted to show his films, and we wanted to put them, they were like, he makes these short films, we wanted to edit them all together, so they were all on one reel. And I said to Jack, can we do that? Can we edit the film together? And Jack says, I don't know how to do that. I said, but you make the films. He says, I don't make the films. Somebody else makes the films for me. you know? And I fortunately knew how to do this. I had been working with film, and so I sat in an editing room with Jack while he sat there smoking these long Winston 100s, and he told me about how an artist doesn't necessarily have to make his work. It's like we talked about traditions of like Rembrandt's studio having hundreds of assistants and things like that, and I took that to heart because I realized that there was an urgency I had to my work that I wanted to make work, but I wasn't willing to spend the time that, for instance, like painting is how long a painting takes to make. It's like the original time-based art, but I wanted to work faster. If I get somebody help me to fill in, to do things. I mean, I realize for me with my work is I'm essential to the work. I realize I like to think of myself as the lightning to Frankenstein. It's like my work doesn't come alive until I finally work on it. So I've gotten it to the point now where these drawings are broken down to like we plan out. I sit with my studio manager. I have a bunch of assistants. It's almost like an artist has favorite brushes. I have certain guys I know are really good at hair, or certain guys are really good at feathers, or someone else really good at. So we've developed this whole technique of working where we break it down into like groups. It's a strategy how to execute the work in that sense. And then ultimately I finish the drawings off because I have to amp it up and make it have it. So it always has this feel that's made by one hand is really critical. But Jack was the one who really introduced that to me. When I did the show, that first show at Metro, it was a bit, I insisted upon doing it. I think at that time the gallery was a little hesitant about me having this, but I had listed everyone. There were the framer, the guy who framed the work, the woman who helped. There was only one person who helped me make the drawings at that time. I listed the guy who helped make some of the sculptures. I think I listed the shippers. It was, to me, it was really important to like show all the people that were involved in the work. I mean, I don't do it so much anymore. I have a really great studio now in New York with people that work for me, and that I still need to be there and spend my time there for sure and execute the work. But the thing is, I have to make sure the work always has that feeling that it's done by one hand, although many hands have been working on it. And I know how to break down that system for sure. But the idea of the artist, but now the more and more I read about art history, I realize how many artists have had so many assistants, and Rembrandt, things like that, having these huge studios in that sense. So I feel like I'm part of a tradition in that sense for sure. You know.
When you visit Robert's studio, everything is covered with a film of charcoal dust. And I want to tell us a little bit about the charcoal. And you have all these varieties. I know you told me a brand you used went out of business, and you ordered every single variety of charcoal in the world you could get and tested. It's the charcoal is very important to you.
I was just telling a story to somebody the other day about how when I first got to New York, I was playing around with different mediums, and I decided to use some oil stick. So I went to Pearl Paint to try to buy some oil stick, and somebody said to me, Richard Serra has bought up all the oil stick. Like 25 years later, one of my assistants said he knew somebody who went to Pearl Paint to buy some charcoal, and they said Longo had bought up all the charcoal. I thought, wow, that's kind of cool, but anyway, the way that charcoal drawings happened, originally the Men in the Cities drawings were predominantly graphite. I mean, that was more the medium I was much more akin to. The big black areas were usually filled in with charcoal, but I hated charcoal. I thought it was incredibly imprecise and messy and dirty. And in the Christmas of 1999, in the 90s, I was a bit lost with my work. I felt like first I was blamed for the 80s, one of the guys that, like I was part of the original sin of Schnabel, Sally, Fischl. We were all like the original sin. But I was a bit lost, and my kids were home for the holiday to drive me crazy, and I went to my studio and I didn't know what to do. I had just taught my son how to surf, and I don't know why in the studio we had one of the surfing magazines, and I thought, well, maybe I'll draw this wave. Because the wave, my work had always been somewhat meditations or mediations on power at that point, and I thought maybe this is the ultimate power, it's nature, so I'll draw this wave. So I went to find some graphite pencils, because I had some paper, similar paper that I used for Men in Cities, and I didn't have any graphite pencil. I just had this box of really shitty charcoal. And I went, but I really want to do this. And I started using the charcoal, and it was really a struggle. That first drawing took maybe a couple of months to do, but somehow something clicked in it because I use a paper that has just enough grain texture in it to evoke the sense of a photograph. And the charcoal, you can't use charcoal and graphite together because they don't mix. So I never used graphite again. It was primarily, so the white in my drawing is always the white of the paper. So it became very tedious to keep that white, but in the sense that by using the charcoal, so it evolved to a point where we started grinding up charcoal to make dust and making it into so you could put on with a brush and things like. So we developed so many different ways of applying the charcoal versus stick, pencil, powder, brushes, things like that. And then then at one point I talked to a conservator about spraying the drawings. This woman, Carol Ann and Kuso and Garrow at the Whitney, and she told me you have to spray the drawings laying down so the fixative falls on it. Things like. So we got to the point where we had taken this stuff to insanity. So all these drawings are on that same paper that I made Men in the Cities on, except the paper is mounted, 2 layers of paper are mounted to honeycomb aluminum. So every panel that I work on costs about $3,000 before I work on it. That's why I make a lot of studies, because I just don't want to make too many mistakes. But the thing is, the surface is really quite beautiful to work on. And I've developed ways of, my degree in art is actually as a sculptor. And I think I basically, with drawing, it's opposite of traditional painting. Traditional painting work from dark to light, and I work from light to dark. So I start with a white piece of paper, and the last thing I do is the black. And I carve out, with an eraser, I carve out the images basically in that sense. And so it's very different than painting. Although I think my works are not drawings, I think my works are paintings in that sense because they're scale and stuff like that. But I hope that answers that question.
Right. When we showed Robert's work last year, people would come in and ask about the paintings. No, they're drawings, but they read as powerful paintings.
Yeah.
So Robert mentioned something that I want to emphasize. So when you go upstairs and take a look at the work, the white areas are the paper. They're not added with a white chalk, and that's something extraordinary. So the erasing is as important as the application.
Yeah, we have now we have all these different kind of erasers. About 5 or 6 years ago, we have pink erasers, white erasers, kneaded erasers. Then someone showed up with an electric eraser that architects use. It was like, zzz, zzz, zzz. And that changed everything. What's interesting, the paper has a degree of forgiveness which is quite extraordinary. I can get back to white relatively easy, but there's a certain point of saturation where it says, no, you can't go there. And then it stops at gray and I'm dead. So I have to be very, very careful how it's like those white, when you try to draw white with black, it's really hard. The opioids, that drawing, for instance, is very hard to make the pills, or doing the icebergs are really tedious. You have to build it with layers and layers of powder, how you build it up. And again, the erasing, like I said, I think I am still more a sculptor than a painter in the sense that I'm carving the image out for sure.
So before we begin talking about the current images, we should talk about Men in the Cities, which fully entered into the culture. So it's very rare when an artwork goes beyond the art world and enters into fashion, into musical performance. And Robert, you were a curator at the Kitchen. You were very involved in performance. You had a band. And Men in the Cities really fuses visual art and performance. Yeah. And so maybe you can talk about the process of how these were made, how they were conceived. And I had the great experience of being on a roof where Robert threw medicine balls at me and photographed me so that I could be in Men in the Cities model. never forget
Jeffrey
that.
was one of the first people to buy my work, which is always quite important to me in that sense. But yeah, when I first started doing these drawings, which were graphite and charcoal, they were originally based off of images that were ripped out of the magazines and newspapers that. And somehow I would start to isolate figures. Like I would get rid of all the background. I would just do the figure and then I realized that I did this show where there were some reliefs in it, this American soldier image of a guy being shot, and that got the most attention. I remember reading Janos Cornelis, in an interview where he talked about how when he worked on all these different works and how he decided that he would investigate the works that the people liked the most. And he said, you have to, as an artist, you have to work towards affection, which was the most important thing I learned that helped me, because I realized that stuff, that image of the guy being shot, that was a relief, got the most attention of anything I was working on. I should investigate that. So I basically dropped everything else, which was performances and bands and sculptures and things like that, and says, okay, I'm going to do that. But how do I do that? Because I can't. That was based originally on a still from a movie, but I can't find these images anymore. Wait, why don't I just photograph my friends? And the irony is, I realized that as a kid growing up, one of my favorite games playing as a kid was called Who Could Fall Dead the Best. You have to realize, as growing up, one of the things that changed in cinema was the way that people died in movies. Like Sam Peckinpah changed everything. Like in the olden days, James Cagney would get shot, he would like fall over. In the Sam Peckinpah movie, a guy would get shot and get blown through the wall. The dance of death became so animated. So this game that we played called Who Could Fall Dead the Best would be one person would pretend to have the gun, and the other two guys would have to run at him, and he'd shoot him, and whoever died the best got to be the guy with the gun. And I basically took that idea and did that with people on the roof. I said, look, so what I would do is I would take them up on the roof and I would throw stuff at them and photograph them. Then I realized I needed a motor drive camera, so that was the next thing. I got a motor drive camera. And then I realized as I made them, I wanted to make them in sequence. I didn't want to be single images. I wanted to have a kind of rhythm like a guitar chords and like a Sex Pistols song or something. I wanted to go like wham, bam, bam. And so I would make notations in my notebook how I kind of wanted them to be. And I would take hundreds and hundreds of photographs to get one image that I thought was really good in that sense. So that process was really a lot. And all the drawings is really weird. When they talk about my images being young yuppies and things like that, I go, they're not. They're like downtown punks. It was like, in New York City, you have to understand there was a Broadway separated New York there was a west side and there was the east side. The east side punks were like the leather jackets, the bleached hair, the green, the Dago green, black. The other side was the artsy, like no wave, like more film noir, influenced by Godard, things like that. We were all wearing like skinny ties, pointy shoes, things like that. And it was and that was the art side of it. Like that's where all the bands came, the theater girls came out of it. And my drawings, to me, those people aren't, urbanized. To me, men wore suits, women wore dresses. And it was like their uniforms, their urban uniforms in that sense. But they weren't, but ironically, I did live down by Wall Street at the time. So I saw all these people in suits and ties at the same time, which is interesting. So it's a long answer anyway.
Well, just a personal anecdote. So I was one of the models, and anticipating Robert's drawing of me, and he presents it, and very animated body, but there's no head. And I said, Robert, where's my head? I thought this was going to be a portrait. And he said, well, people can tell you by your hands. Your hands are very distinctive. Okay. And then about 6 months later, this small drawing arrives, which we used for the Evite here. And Robert said, okay, here's your head. So I was fascinated. Some years ago, I did an exhibition with the fashion designer Eddie Slimane when I was at MoCA, and talking with Eddie about his influences. One of his biggest influences on his fashion, the men in the city's drawings. And so I wanted to ask this very interesting thing of your art entering into the culture. People maybe even ripping off of your art to, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's one of the, in a weird way, the highest form of compliment. If you're able to create an archetype that enters into the culture, you lose authorship, which in a weird way is a kind of flattering thing, in that sense that, and I've had some young guys who came to work for me based upon the most recent stuff they saw of mine, and they went, "Oh, you're the guy that did that." They didn't connect it in that sense. It was kind of interesting, but yeah, I think that thing about losing authorship is a really important thing. I had been approached to do ad campaigns and things like that, and I just said, "No, go away," because I always felt they were ripping me off. And then finally, Bottega Veneta approached me about doing something, and I said, "Well, you got to pay me a lot of money because I want a new car, but I have to do it this way, this way, this way, this way." And I gave all these really things how I did it, and they did it, and it came out really well. It was okay. It was many years after I did Men in Cities. Men in Cities kind of ran its course. It kind of ended in 1982. It's every series I work on has a kind of life cycle to it for sure. It kind of says move on to the next thing for sure. And so Men in Cities kind of ended, and the Combines kind of started after that for sure. But it was also very funny in the beginning. People would come up to me and pose like, "Draw me." Get out. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask you about the current work. And there's a great line yours that we used in the press release for our Los Angeles exhibition, that people ask me, am I preaching to the choir, showing this kind of politically charged work inside the art world where most people are agreeing? And he says, no. Robert says, I'm screaming at the choir.
Yeah.
So you're somebody who is very engaged in what's going on in the world, where a lot of artists with a great career behind you of nearly 50 years, the work becomes kind of interior, the work is about the artist. But in your case, you're taking on the world in a bigger way than ever.
Yeah. I think the thing is, I have a great life, and I feel uncomfortable that I see the world the way it is. It interferes with my great life. It's like, in that sense, it's like I feel this moral imperative to deal with this subject matter. It's like I want to drift away from it. I stopped watching the news a little bit. Then every now and then an image happens and I feel like that scene in The Mafia where then they pull me back in. It's like I can't help it, but I feel like part of my job is to report about the time I live in, and these images are so fleeting. It's like the images you see on your phone, they're here and they're gone, and it's somehow someone has to make this stuff accountable. It just has to be recorded in a way that, and the thing is that history, when I was younger, I thought that I went into the future. And now as I'm older, I realize the future comes at me and it changes the past. And so my idea now is history, I want to report history as it's happening rather than let somebody else say what happened. So I also think it's really important that you find this balance between something that's highly personal and socially relevant. It's like this idea of, I always talk about this, if you remember the old radios where you try to tune in a radio station, to me it becomes an issue of finding that moment that's really right between that socially relevant and highly personal. So all these images that are somewhat politically charged or are all highly personal images to me. They're not just political in that sense. They mean something to me on a very personal level for sure in that sense. So that aspect of it is really important. And I can look at every image that I make and I can track down the very personal aspect to it, which is really important to me.
Now, you don't hesitate to go big with ambition. And tell us in particular about the series of the Capitol, the White House, and the Supreme Court. Maybe just about the most ambitious series of works of any person ever working in this medium. as ambitious as anything any artist is doing right now.
Yeah, thanks. Well,
And
it's very funny when I tell people, I think I'm repeating some stuff I talked last night about when I tell people I make charcoal drawings and they think I'm making these little tiny little drawings on saying no, they're like 40 feet long and 10 feet tall. But yeah, the interesting about these three drawings that are here, they were all done at three different periods of time. And when Obama was president, I was so outraged by how the House of Representatives, this is when we first started learning about idiots like Ted Cruz and things like that, were giving him such a hard time. And I was also reading Moby Dick at the time, and Moby Dick is kind of like the genetic code of America. And I started to see the Capitol as this, almost like the white whale on William. So I decided I wanted to make this drawing of the Capitol because I started to learn that one end of the, so every time I do a different series, and stuff, I do research about that. When I did the guns, I contacted the FBI. I mean, I do research in relation. So I learned everything about the Capitol. So one end of the Capitol is the Senate, the other end is the House of Representatives. When they're in session, they have the flag is flying. So if you you'll notice the Senate side has the flag flying because the Senate was supportive of Obama at that point, and the House of Representatives were out to lunch basically. So I learned to where every room was in that building where the vice president was and things like that. And I wanted to make this building have this feeling of this kind of presence where I made it so it had these clouds made it feel like a dolly zoom where it suddenly looks like it's moving at you. I wanted the building to have. It's very funny. The last thing I added to this drawing were the two end panels. I kind of wanted to make it look like it was on a hill, so it had this feeling of a hill. But I like this idea. Again, going back to the $1 Million movie, I always remember King Kong looking in the window and I wanted us as a viewer, I wanted us to be King Kong. I wanted you to look in the window and see some senator, with abusing some aide or something. I wanted you to be able to look in I wanted you to spend time to look all little windows. So anyway, the Supreme Court happened during the fiasco with Merrick Garland. That was so upsetting that it was happening. And I saw the building almost like deteriorating. So I wanted the building to have a feeling of deteriorating. And I remember looking at Goya's paintings of Toledo and those incredible skies. So I wanted this really stormy sky. So I combined these things together. And so that was done during Merrick Garland and the end of Obama. And then the White House was done during Trump. And I don't know if you've seen the Sleeping Beauty where when she falls asleep, all this gnarly forest grows up around her. So I made that forest around the White House. That's the idea came from the Disney thing. But at the same time, I tipped the White House back a bit so it's a little ominous. And in the front of it, it has a sinkhole. So if you sit down and look at it, you're actually in this, you know what sinkholes are when the ground just falls out and you're in this big hole. So you're actually sitting in this big hole. And in that drawing, faintly in one of the windows, is the silhouette of Trump. You can barely see it. I mean, it's just almost impossible to see. But I wanted this feeling that I was in this sinkhole looking up at this. There was kind of weird hopelessness at that moment when it was happening. At the same time, there's this American flag kind of flying, which has this little bit of hope in there, because I think hope is a really important thing that we have. We can be better in that sense. That it's really important. But so yeah, and these three together here is so great. It's such a perfect setting.
they look remarkable. I can say I think this is one of the great works of American art of our time.
Thank you.
So we're here in Palm Springs. Now you are, I would say, you are the most authentic New York artist. And so here we are in Palm Springs where you've bought a house. So tell us about your life here. You have set up a studio. Yeah. And I just want to hear about this current chapter in your career.
And I wear light blue t-shirts and pink shorts and stuff.
Are you the only person in Palm Springs dressing all in black?
I think I've been noticed. Someone's made some comment that I haven't adapted to the Palm Springs vibe. I mean, I don't have any other colors. I mean, the thing is, I have black. This shirt's kind of black, kind of matches. It's the biggest issue is how black is. But this really great designer, he passed away. His name is Tokyo Kumagai. He said, when you dress in black, it's called defensive dressing. But I think it just makes it really easy because I can't. That way, I don't have to figure out what the fuck I'm gonna wear. I mean, really. When you wear colored clothes and stuff like that, and you get dressed, what do you think about wearing? It's just like how much blacker that shirt is than the other one. It's really easy in that sense.
Well, it is all consistent with your artistic vision.
Yeah, well, it's just easier in that sense. I mean, I actually have expanded now. I have maybe like 5 pairs of jeans, or that's which is the most I've ever had. But I have like 10 black shirts, and I have 2 pairs of black shoes, and I do have black sneakers. And I recently bought a pair of black hiking boots so I can go hiking here. But yeah, I mean, being here has been quite extraordinary. I've been very fortunate. I'm with this extraordinary woman, Sophie Shinney. She directed the first video, and she got me to come out here. And my art dealers, actually, Helene and Janelle, have had houses out here. So we came to visit them, and we stayed at their house. And then next thing we know, we're renting houses and kind of digging it. I mean, obviously, I've said this last night. I mean, palm trees to me always remind me of Apocalypse Now. I always expect the helicopters to come and and the napalm should start falling and shit like that. But I really dig the kind of calmness of being here for sure. I mean, we also live in East Hampton, so in New York I live in East Hampton and I work in the city, so I bounce back and forth. So I was hoping that I could bounce back and forth from here in New York, but then the plague happened and kind of screwed things up a little bit. I mean, I'm going back for 2 weeks next week, but I mean, I like it here. And our house is in Little Tuscany, which is really great. It's modest. It's like a bunker, but I have a swimming pool, which is really pretty great. I was in the swimming pool today. It was really pretty wild. It's like, so I really dig it. It's really nice, and people have been really quite sweet and kind and nice, except for that Marilyn statue. I took it kind of personally because I was installing the show, and I looked out the window and I see this white pair of underwear. Are you mooning me? I thought this was like so incredibly insulting. It was like, don't you have this rule in LA that you're not allowed to look up women's dresses when they're on the stairs or something like that? It's just unbelievable to me. It's just so bizarre. And I drive by it every time. It's just like, what the fuck is that doing here? But anyway, it doesn't even look like her.
Let's move from Marilyn to upstairs and take a look at Robert's amazing work.
Thank you all.